there's no reason to apologize. I think if I apologize, it wouldn't make 10 cents worth of difference to them. There's nothing to apologize for.
Well, from the Muslim ban to a Gold Star family, if President Trump abides by anything, it's this: never apologize. And, well, Paul Manafort didn't apologize either for all of his crimes yesterday, putting this exchange from November back into focus.
It seems like you're leaning toward pardoning Paul Manafort. Is that true?
It's very sad what's happened to Paul, the way he's being treated. I've never seen anybody treated so poorly. I have not offered any pardons. And I think they asked, or whatever, would you? I said, I'm not taking anything off the table.
Well, good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Friday, March the 8th. Mika is on assignment for International Women's Day at a Know Your Value event in Detroit. But along with Willie and me, we have renowned adman Donnie Deutsch, MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos, columnist and associate editor for The Washington Post, David Ignatius, politics editor for The Daily Beast, Sam Stein, and former U.S. attorney and MSNBC contributor Barbara McQuaid. And Willie, my God, the sentencing, which the guidelines were at 20 years, was severely reduced by this federal judge who had, raised questions about the way he handled this hearing and handled the trial from the very beginning. Just an absolutely shocking sentence that, again, suggests that not only that Paul Manafort had no need to apologize in the eyes of this judge. Also suggested that there are two Americas when it comes to justice. That if you're a wealthy, white-collar criminal, you're treated one way, and if you're not, you're treated another.
Yeah, Paul Manafort did not apologize. The recommendation was 19.5 to 24 years in prison for Paul Manafort. Yesterday, he was given less than 4 months. We've got some very interesting points of view around this table. A new reaction this morning to the first bout of prison time for Paul Manafort. 4 years, less than 4 years actually, for President Trump's former campaign chairman, who was facing, as I said, between 19.5 and 24 years under federal guidelines. But senior judge T.S. Ellis of Virginia called that range excessive and sentenced Manafort to 47 months on tax and bank fraud charges, declaring the 69-year-old Manafort, quote, has lived an otherwise blameless life. In a short statement before his sentencing, Manafort did not apologize, nor did he express remorse, but he said, I have felt punishment during these proceedings. Judge Ellis took note of the statement, saying, quote, I was surprised I did not hear you express regret. The judge also ordered Manafort to pay $25 million in restitution and a $50,000 fine, while crediting Manafort for the 9 months in jail, which allows him to be released in about 3 years. Manafort is set to be sentenced in Washington, D.C. next week on 2 conspiracy counts, each of those carrying a maximum sentence of 5 years. And, Joe, there will be the question of whether that sentence, when it's handed down by Judge Amy Berman Jackson in the federal court, the District of D.C., whether she serves those concurrently or consecutively, adding to Paul Manafort's time in prison.
It is a good question. Why don't we bring in Danny? Danny, what do you think the answer to that is going to be? Will Paul Manafort have more time tacked under the 47 months that he got in the Northern Virginia case?
Yes, he will. The D.C. case is a very different case, and here's why. The sentencing guidelines for Manafort in D.C. are way above even the statutory maximum, and when that happens, the sentencing guidelines automatically become the statutory maximum. In D.C., that's 2 counts, 5 years each. You add those up, you get 10 years. So that's the recommended guidelines right out of the gate for the judge, is that 10-year maximum. That doesn't mean that she'll sentence him to the full 10 years. She might still go below the guidelines based on aggravating or really mitigating factors, not aggravating factors. So she could go below those guidelines, but she will certainly be thinking about the sentence that Paul Manafort received, whether she speaks about it or not.
So, Danny, let me ask you, given the length of time that Paul Manafort created or engaged in these crimes, and given the fact that he did it at the highest levels of government, and given that actually, it could be argued that it damaged American democracy. How in the world could this judge go so far below guidelines?
The simple answer is because he can. The sentencing guidelines for well over a decade now have been advisory only, and that means that judges can go below the sentencing guidelines as long as they calculate
Were you
them.
shocked that he did?
Yes, I was, and in fact, it's on the record. I did believe the judge would go below the sentencing guidelines, but I was thinking more on the order of 10 years to 15 years, not in the 5-year range. But if you look at the statistics, if you look at all defendants or almost all defendants 69 years of age or older who are sentenced in the federal system, most of them get in about the 5-year range, and most fraud and similar cases get much lower sentences. Remember, the guidelines are not a representation or an empirical study of how recent sentences have gone. They are promulgated by the Sentencing Commission, and in fact, often you see that courts go below and they can go above the guidelines because they legally can do so and have been able to do so for many years now.
Barbara McQuaid, I would ask you how you feel about the sentence given, but I know how you feel because you're in the top of the fold here in the New York Times. A quote from you calling the sentence atrociously low and absurd. I'll ask you to explain that, but there's also another element of this. Prosecutors said in court yesterday, effectively, yes, we talked to Paul Manafort for 50 hours. We got nothing of value from him. In fact, we know now that he lied to us.
Yeah, I think that this sentence is atrociously low, 47 months out of a range of 19 to 24 years. And actually, this is something you see quite a bit in white-collar cases. As Danny said, even out of the gate, he was expecting a sentence of 10 to 15 years. And I think it is, as Joe described, the evidence of two Americas. We see this very frequently in white-collar crime cases where defendants get a huge break on their sentencing guidelines. You know, they say things just like Paul Manafort said, that I feel shame. I feel like I've already been punished because of the embarrassment I feel among my peers. Well, you know, tell that to the indigent defendant who doesn't have prominent people to write letters for them, to vouch for them and all of their good works. To say that he has led an otherwise blameless life is like the old joke about, other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? He committed $55 million in fraud over an extensive period of time, failed to pay $6 million in taxes. It's a serious crime, and he got a slap on the wrist. And I think for that, people should be outraged.
Well, and anybody that has followed Paul Manafort's career would say he has lived far from a blameless life. This guy who's not been a Boy Scout for a very long time, and all you have to do is talk to his colleagues and see what his MO has been over the past 30, 40 years. And nobody that knows him or has ever worked with him in Washington, D.C. would say with a straight face that Paul Manafort has lived a blameless life. It's a joke, and this federal judge's sentencing of Paul Manafort to 47 months was a joke. It was also very bizarre. The Washington Post pointed this out, that given everything that has happened, Manafort's lying was bizarre, as was the statement that his attorney made after the 47-month sentencing was handed down. Let's take a quick look at his lawyer.
Mr. Manafort finally got to speak for himself. He made clear he accepts responsibility for his conduct. And I think most importantly, what you saw today is the same thing that we had said from day one. There is absolutely no evidence that Paul Manafort was involved with any collusion with any government official from Russia. Thank you.
David Ignatius, he wasn't charged in this case with collusion. If he wanted to, he should have just gone down to Kinko's and they could have made him a banner and he could have held it up in front of the cameras and said, "Mr. Trump, please pardon my client." It was again, one more bizarre act. I talked about the lying. Manafort's continued lying to the special counsel. That was bizarre. That scene was bizarre. What do you make of this, and what do you make of it politically?
Well, it wasn't just Manafort's lawyer who said he wasn't guilty of collusion. It was the judge himself. I thought one of the most unusual aspects of the way the judge presented this was to state himself from the bench that Manafort was not being convicted for anything that involved Russian collusion in the presidential election. This judge, Judge Ellis, from the beginning of this trial has seemed to many courtroom observers to be skeptical of the prosecution's case. He said at one point, I think you're just trying to turn the screws on this guy to get him to sing about other material that you think is more important. He lectured one of the prosecutors, Greg Andrus, look at me, don't look down, look up at me. It was almost like a schoolmaster in a school. So this judge from the beginning has been signaling skepticism about the case. He's a somewhat eccentric judge. But I thought the underlining the issue of collusion here at the conclusion of this trial by the judge was quite unusual. That and the fact that he called the sentencing guidelines that the prosecution had come up with excessive. We'll hear those phrases again from the Trump side in the months ahead.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.